It's 10:01 Pacific time. We're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all to everyone who is taking time to meet with us. Kent and Dwayne, thank you very much for your time. To give these guys a proper introduction, I'll give you a quick background of who exactly you're going to be hearing speak today as soon as I find all my notes. So, Kenton, let's see, you're out in Phoenix, right, with Mike?
I am.
Very cool. And Dwayne is down in Tampa. Kenton has been working in economic research and consulting and fixed income sales, trading, and portfolio management since 1990. For the past 12 years, he has been dedicated to public portfolios in the Southwest and California, overseeing assets approaching $7 billion, right? So that's billion with a B.
With a B.
Kenton received, that's right. Kenton received a Bachelor of Business degree from TCU and his MBA from Arizona State. He's been a speaker and educator for the Government Finance Officers Association and its branch, as well as been responsible for educating portfolio managers throughout the ABA, Texas Bankers Association, Graduate School of Banking at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and now he's an adjunct professor in finance and honor faculty member at the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University. So about a 30-plus year career working in finance. Dwayne, he began his real estate and technology.
What has Kenton really done?
Nothing.
That's impressive, by the way. Very impressive.
I've gotten quite opinionated, but that's about it.
Dwayne began his real estate and technology career back in 2002, where he began a tech company that he grew to work with 10% of the nation's distressed properties during the financial crisis. But even before the financial crisis, Dwayne called the crash in 2005, 2 years before it really started, and accurately pinpointed 19 of the 20 markets with the most severe downturn. He was regularly featured on CNN Money during the financial crisis. And Dwayne has also started 6 startups that has resulted in nearly $300 million in exit value created, including the fastest growing technology company ever in the real estate space at the time. And in 2016, he was awarded the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year for the Southeast region. And currently Dwayne is the executive chairman for Commissions Inc., who's sold to Fidelity National Financial. Also where I met Dwayne. So a lot of words to say that we have a lot of really qualified people on this webinar today. And really the goal is for all the attendees to walk away understanding that there is more going on behind the scenes than just a virus and a market crash. And we also want to discuss the differences between this and the housing crisis back in the day. So let's go ahead and kick it off. A lot of folks do point directly to COVID-19, like I mentioned, for the reason for the crash. Would the two of you like to shed some light on what actually happened and how COVID-19 impacted that or kind of wore the face for that crash?
You want me to take this, or you want to go ahead, Dwayne?
It doesn't matter.
Well, go ahead then.
Okay. Yeah. So, back in high school, we used to have, for big homecoming, we used to have this big bonfire, right? And we'd have all this wood, we'd stack it all up. And, then the time for the homecoming parade and all that would come in and we'd have a big bonfire and the light would be, or the match would be lit. If you think about COVID-19, well, COVID-19 was basically a little bit of kerosene and the match. But all the wood was already there, and there was a structural underpinning that was getting ready to kind of slowly but surely, I'm not going to say collapse, but start to go into a steady decline before COVID-19, and COVID-19 just really collapsed everything. The last 10 years have been a debt-driven cycle. Corporate debt, governmental debt, and consumer debt added up in the trillions and trillions of dollars. And I've got.
So when you say that was the wood, real quick, just to tie it together, all this debt is the wood that resulted in the fire.
Yes, and you started seeing it was in December 2018 when the yield curve initially inverted, and everybody kept saying, well, a yield curve inversion is different this time. And for those of you that don't know what a yield curve inversion basically is, it's when you're paying or you're getting paid more for short-term interest rates than long-term, and typically that's the other way around. And typically bonds will signal that there's stress coming. On average, 9.7 months after the yield curve inverts, you have a market high. And basically about what it would have been was February 2020. If you look at the cycle, should have been when a recession would have theoretically started. Now, we've had a lot of Fed printing. In October of 2019, the repo market, which I'll let Kenton maybe explain that a little bit better, but it's a very sleepy market. It happens overnight. It's a bank-to-bank or bank-to-hedge fund lending market where balance sheets kind of get corrected. And it's something that really the average American doesn't need to know about because it just kind of happens. But all of a sudden it started freezing up and the Fed had to intervene. And the excuses that the Fed was given to intervene just didn't make sense. And it was a one-time deal this and a one-time deal that. Well, the Fed kept having to intervene, which meant somebody, something, was in trouble, and it wound up being three top hedge funds, Citadel, Millennial, and Point72, which had about $60 billion assets under management, but controlled over $500 billion in assets that were getting ready to implode and be dumped on the market. So like all these things were happening that people didn't see. And all of a sudden you got COVID-19 and then all hell breaks loose.
So when the Fed prints money, what does that mean? Who gets the money?
When they print it, they don't physically print it, they digitally print it. So they shower. Well, let me address real quickly what Dwayne said. I think his analogy was really good. Another one I heard is good is that the COVID-19 was kind of like that ultraviolet light that you take into a hotel room to see just what's on the bedspreads and sheets from previous guests. There's a quick background. We've been in a bond bull market since 1981. I got my first car in 79 or 80 and took out a short-term loan and was paying 19% interest rates just day to day on a short-term loan for a truck. So we've seen rates come down. One of the things that's happened in the last 10, 15 years is you've had this movement globally where it kind of started in Japan, it moved over here, where the Federal Reserve, central bankers kind of bailed out mistakes in the marketplace. In other words, we've grown immune to recessions because recessions usually clear out underbrush, crappy underbrush. But we're in this world, we're in this postmodern economic cycle world where we just don't want recessions anymore. So we've leaned on central bankers to alleviate the recessionary cycle. So if you look at the Japanese experiment, they've been going on 20 years of low interest rates and they have done nothing. They've done nothing but stagnate. The European central bankers started in the GFC by pushing negative interest rates. Well, if low rates are good for the economy, then negative rates must be great for the economy.
Sure.
And
Uh-oh.
Did we freeze?
that's the backdrop. What COVID did, and here's where I make a distinction from most
people. Can you just dropped out for a minute? Okay. Can you just do the last 15 seconds?
From the European central banks.
Yeah, European central banks decided to go on this spree of negative rates, thinking that if low rates are good for an economy, then negative rates must be great. Well, all you're doing is you're bribing or you're coaxing out of the woodwork irresponsible behavior, because interest rate is nothing other than a cost of credit. It has to have some sort of cost. It's a risk metric because it goes into your WACC, it goes into your discount models. So if yields go down, mathematically asset values have to go up. So if we push our yields down, we get inflated asset prices. Now, there's a good school of thought that says the stock market surge that we had since Trump took office was as much a function of low interest rates as it was for structural top line growth. And there's good arguments.
And so,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I just want to kind of unpack some of this because this is a lot for your average person. You mentioned that recessions are good for clearing out the nasty undergrowth, and I'm trying to make some connections here. So in 2008, that nasty undergrowth was subprime mortgages. Now is a recession clearing out the corporate, the nasty amount of debt that has been piled up?
There is a nasty amount of debt that's piled up. The coronavirus has exposed that. The difference here is this is an external shock to the system. This market crash, this meltdown, global meltdown, is self-induced. We're not obligated to destroy ourselves just because a virus breaks out. Those are two separate events. We could have marched on. One thing that I've said repeatedly is that one of the first casualties of a pandemic is context. So we've got, we started with this, the Federal Reserve went into a panic mode and cut interest rates dramatically back to zero. So that sent the markets into a tizzy. Then you had talks of partial shutdowns, full lockdowns, what do they call it, stay in place or
shelter in home.
Shelter in place, like we're doing now, right?
Shelter in place.
Okay, so we've decided that the best remedy for this virus is to shut down the global economy. The problem being is that any economy, any marketplace, or any society is comprised of a number of complex systems that not only overlap, but they interconnect to each other. So we're asking parts of these systems to shut off for a while without understanding the connections they have to other systems. And then we're further leaning on the remaining systems to stay intact and run everything until we feel safe to go outside. So this shock is self-induced. You can argue either way whether it's the right path. We don't know. My fear is if let's say this virus clears and we get some good news and we start to see a market rebound in May-ish, June, July, what are we going to do the next time if this virus comes back? What do central bankers then do? If we're at zero, do they go negative? Does the Dow go to 15K? Because now you've had assets fall in price. You've got interest rates on the floor, so no one can earn any money doing anything, even planning for retirement. So what's the next remedy for this next wave?
It's a good question. And quick request. I think a lot of people tie the economy to the Dow for the day or the S&P, for the day, but those are not the same. Could you kind of provide a better definition of the economy and then how the markets are different?
You want me to do that, or you want Dwayne to take that?
I'll jump in and give it my best shot.
Okay.
So yeah, the stock market in and of itself is not the economy. You may see a stock market rebound and start pricing based on 2021 or possibly 2022 type revenue or earnings now when the economy is still getting its butt handed to it. Give you a good example. Let's say that what Kenton said a minute ago, but let's say we find some kind of solution or COVID-19 starts to break in May or June. The damage to the economy has been done. You have got a lot of, when I say a lot, over 60% of all corporate debt that has been issued has been basically triple B or worse. So when I say that, think about, like, I'm talking subprime. And you're not talking about billions, and you're not talking about hundreds of billions. You're talking about trillions of dollars. These ratings will have to be adjusted down, and because all of a sudden, you've got, Delta Airlines, who, at one time earned X dollars per share. Well, they're not only earning X dollars per share, they're not even flying. And, as Ed Bastian, the CEO, said, unless something major happens, they're going to be out of cash in June. But the stock market today, or the last couple of days, had Delta up because they're betting over the long term that Delta is going to be able to secure financing. They'll be able to get their legs up under them. And while Delta may not fly until August or September, Delta, they're betting on the long haul, and that, 4 or 5 years down the road, they'll get back to that $80 a share. So they're willing to pay that $20 to $25 a share right now. In the meantime, you're not going to have the V-shaped recovery, in my opinion, as a lot of the market people say. And what that is a straight deal down and a straight deal back up. A lot of people are talking about a U-shape, where it's kind of like it goes down and kind of stagnates for a little bit, and then we get our legs and we go back up. And then there's the L, which it's going down and then it's bad, which is what Kent was kind of talking about from Japan a little bit ago. If there's such a thing as between a U and a L, is where I think that we're going to wind up kind of being, because you think about transportation stocks and the effect on the economy. With people staying at home right now, is it in learning how to work from home? And I'm not saying that everybody's going to work from home from here on out, but the amount of corporate travel, will that continue? The amount of pleasure travel, are people going to think twice about hopping on a plane and going to a crowded resort or Disney World? Are you going to think twice about going down to that restaurant or a movie? And when you start looking at the food service industry that handles, parks and theaters and everything else, and the rental cars that get rented from the corporate traveler, and then the service companies that are tied to that, the auto parts dealerships. You could just go on and on and on. And the economy is going to be kind of whacked for quite some time until we kind of figure out what this new economy is going to look like. But we have not seen the last of the layoffs. The layoffs will continue. You're going to see bond downgrades, which is going to increase their company's cost of capital. And it's going to make them harder, not impossible, but harder to go back to the capital markets to keep funding.
You may even see some insolvency, Dwayne.
Oh, not may.
The corporate balance sheets are going to be a bloodbath, because, as Dwayne alluded to, when you have the triple B section of corporate debt is the fattest. So these are corporate balance sheets that are one notch above junk. And probably half of those don't generate the cash flow to service their debt. They call those zombie corporations, because they're living on capital infusions, not top line revenues. So they're technically bankrupt, they just don't know it yet. So when you see these downgrades like Kraft Heinz a month ago, you got Ford that's about to be downgraded to junk. When you're a big corporate bond issuer and you're downgraded to junk, there's a lot of people who can no longer hold your debt. A lot of pension funds, a lot of hedge funds, a lot of retirement plans, a lot of ETFs that are not allowed to hold junk paper. So when you see these downgrades, they have to, by law, sell that paper. Can you imagine selling Ford bonds in a declining market? So you're going to see
no one
these.
wants to buy them.
Well, exactly, because you have a forced liquidation sale. They can't refinance, and if they do, the covenants are now going to be even stricter, because we've gone to kind of easy covenants the last 10 years. My concern is more on the quality of corporate balance sheets than share price. And I agree with Dwayne that share price kind of reflects my future view of cash flows. If I can paint a rosy picture, I can bump up the stock price, given that I have low interest rates. But if my balance sheet is crummy and if I've loaded up with debt because I thought this scenario would last forever, any nudge pushes me over the side, and COVID-19 was the nudge or the sledgehammer that is going to dump a lot of these corporate bonds into junk status or a downgraded status. So now their cost of financing goes up. There's a bearish sentiment. You got to find who's the next buyer when they roll over this debt. And someone says, well, now you're closer to junk than you were last year. Tell me why I should buy your bond. Well, there's only one way. You got to get bribed with more yield.
Which Carnival Cruise Lines, did you see the yield that they had to pay the other day? Kenton?
Yeah.
What was it, 12%?
Yeah. You can deals are currently getting done, but the prices are extraordinary. The market
and
is.
So,
go ahead.
Oh, just to ask, in your estimation, how much longer could we have done this before the COVID nudge or sledgehammer? Did it take something like this?
No, I think without the COVID sledgehammer, I think would have been a great awakening would have been to see Germany slide full bore into a recession. You've got Italy that was kind of teetering. Their banking system is really weak. They've got crummy assets on the books. Europe was going to be the driver because they've pushed interest rates down to negative for some time. They're not seeing the results that they thought they would. You've got Germany, which is supposedly the corporate hegemon of the EU, throwing off some recessionary signals. China's debt issue, their state-owned enterprises, the debt load that they carry has always been an issue. So COVID came along and just it went around the globe and just pushed everyone and knocked everyone over. We responded to the point where we full-blown panicked, from the Fed to the White House to every agency to every state. So now we're in lockdown mode. So we've decided we're going to shut things down, and that's going to make it better. The virus doesn't care what interest rates are. It doesn't care if I'm in my house or if I'm walking down the street.
The oil shock, I agree with everything that Kenton said, but the oil shock could have also been another match, for lack of a better term. You got $175 billion in energy bonds out there that are rated BBB or lower. And you start looking at places like, the Houston, Dallas, all the shale oil areas, all the offshore drillers that are going to be looking at layoffs. They cannot afford to drill at what the current price is, but it also, there's a lot of the shale companies that can't afford to cap their systems. And so they're literally getting ready to run out of places to store oil. And while, oil at the gas tank is in theory a tax cut for people like us, if we're not going anywhere, it's not a tax cut. And right now you got a lot of, banks that are underwriting those notes that are kind of scrambling right now. And you got all the energy companies that you wonder, we saw a few that closed their doors last week, and they're the first of many that's going to happen, as Kenton said in Solomon.
And are those oil prices a result of Russia and Saudi Arabia and what they're doing, or is that unrelated?
Oh yeah, they flooded the market. If you could pick a scenario where you said, hey, let's really screw over the U.S., and I'm not saying that's what happened in a coordinated fashion, but you start looking at our, again, consumer debt, our corporate debt, our governmental debt, the COVID-19, and then you put the oil shock supply on top of everything else. Man, that's quite a 1, 2, 3 punch that you've got right there between the debt, the crisis, and the oil.
It's also a head scratcher for Saudi Arabia. I don't know what their interest is in a $25 a barrel oil price.
Right.
But I'd hate to be a banker in Midland, Texas today, because you've got these fracking fields that are being depleted, and you've got a glut. and you've got a lot of debt in that space that's got to be refinanced, who's going to step up and reload a fracker or a driller or anyone in the E&P space in this marketplace? You're going to see insolvency. You're going to see massive insolvencies in recognized names. Boeing will not go under because it's too critical for our defense infrastructure. But when you have Boeing go to Wall Street and say, you know, that $13 billion I have as far as a credit line, I'm going to draw it down. I don't need it now, but I'm going to draw it down anyway, because I'd rather have the cash in my house than in your vaults. That's a big sign.
And so let's bring it back around to the negative interest rate conversation, because recently when the Fed dropped interest rates to zero, a lot of misinformation was spread, largely by some realtors saying, hey, you can get a house now for 0% interest. We discussed that on a previous webinar as to why that's not the case, but now interpret negative interest rates. You know, why would Europe think that's a good idea when Japan has done it for years now and it hasn't helped? You just help us better understand negative interest rates.
There is no understanding negative interest rates. They don't make sense. They don't make sense. They don't work, and they've never, you know, for the first time. This is you can ascribe this to the COVID virus as well. There's a certain degree of where we are in society that we've developed this vanity to think that we figured things out. So in 4,000 years of money, we've just now figured out that negative interest rates can be a good thing, when everything on the planet shows they don't do any good at all, and yet we continue to do it. So
the theory kind of being, Randy, I go by treasuries on behalf of, you know, this company or this person or whatever, and now all of a sudden I'm getting negative. So the inducement is, instead of putting that money in the treasuries or bank or whatever else, I can't pay to put my money in the bank, so I might as well invest it in something, hoping that gets the economy going. And that it just doesn't work. Is Kenton made a great point earlier. With all the Fed printing, assets are so inflated right now, it's hard to take money, put it into the market, and make it really turn like it needs to in proportion to the risk that you're taking. But the theory on the negative interest rates is to try to promote local investment.
Well, Randy, you just answered your own question when you said the realtors will say you have 0% interest rates, therefore it's a good opportunity to buy this home. Well, the interest rate is a cost to do something else. The fact that there's zero doesn't mean that you should go out and buy an overinflated asset that may crumble in price in a year or two, because then you'll say, well, where did that zero interest rate get me? But bankers in Europe, where they have used negative interest rates, rely on the fact that there's enough people who can only buy their sovereign debt. They're contractually obliged to buy those local treasuries, so they have to. So they have to pay to put their money in the bank. Then there's people who say there's no other options available. I would rather pay you to store this asset and have it be there in 10 years when I need it in a better economy.
Mm-hmm. Understood. So let's start to shift towards the economy in regards to the housing market and how this is going to be impacted.
Okay, so I'll kind of go first. You know, in 2008 to 2010, we had a subprime, which turned into Alt A, and then Triple A. Everything became a crisis, and it dragged the rest of the economy down with it. This is not a residential real estate crisis. However, residential real estate is going to be absolutely impacted. When you start seeing, you know, tens of millions of people that are unemployed, or 10 million right now that's unemployed in just the last 2 weeks, which that's how many were unemployed over a 2 years time frame in 2008 to 2010. That's going to have a ripple effect throughout the economy. You're seeing people lose their jobs. And then you've got the, you think about it this way, a first-time home buyer impacts 3.3 houses. So right, so first-time home buyer, move up buyer, and then kind of move down to retirement kind of buyer. It goes all the way up. First-time home buyer is typically your 25, 35-year-old person with X amount of money to put down on a home. And without job stability, is that going to happen? If that doesn't happen, that's going to affect this. That's thing one. Thing two is there's a 2,000% increase that I saw today in the number of forbearance requests, a 2,000% increase from this week to last week. So you're already going to have a mortgage market that's going to be hurting. So you're going to have excess inventory coming on. On the flip side of the coin, let's pretend for a moment, you've got a younger generation that's used to the sharing economy. I don't need a car. I'll Uber. My son in California, who I was telling you about earlier, Randy, he actually lives in an Airbnb in California, but they like the mobility. If that mobility piece is really, I'm not going to be transferring from this city to that city and I'm scared to put my roots down. If that piece kind of goes away, then you may start to see people go back in, the young people that had been kind of avoiding buying, you may start to see them come back in, but not until they get, their kind of financial roots up under them. Real estate's going to be challenging. Obviously in the COVID-19 market, I had a real estate closing last week, but it was kind of a virtual closing. I've never had it before. I had people with masks on come to my house and it was kind of crazy. I got lucky, and those are going to be few and far between. You're going to take a hit over the first 90 days. And then the question is the pent up demand that you would have had for the spring and summer season, is that going to continue, or are people going to be cautious coming out of it? I don't know. Commercially, from a REIT perspective, the REITs are going to get their butts kicked. And that's going to be another headwind to the economy.
Yeah, especially the higher leveraged REITs, Dwayne. You mentioned demand, and I think that's going to be the critical driver, because if we walk back 6 weeks to 8 weeks and we saw this virus start to bloom in China, everyone was talking about supply. How does this affect Walmart's supply chain? How does this affect them being able to build iPhones? Can I get my AirPods next week, or do I have to wait 6 months? So we had this supply problem, and as the virus spread globally, all of a sudden it became a demand problem. So we have a supply issue in Asia. Now we've got a global demand that has fallen off the floor. I don't know when that's going to pick itself up. How am I going to be inspired to go do anything? If I'm legally not allowed to work, if I really can't afford to buy a car, I certainly can't afford to buy a home. And what environment do I need to be made comfortable to make those big capital decisions? Because if unemployment continues to bloom, like Dwayne rightly suggests it will, and I've got corporate CapEx spending cratering. What was it, XOM, or who just announced a 30 to 40% cut in CapEx? I think
Exxon.
This morning. Was it Exxon?
Yes.
Okay, so no one's going to pay dividends anymore. The stock buyback phenomena is pretty much dead. Just-in-time inventory is pretty much dead globally. So you have increased nationalism. Where's your demand going to come from? From the consumer side. When you see everything on the business side retrenching. That makes me really nervous for real estate.
This should be a scary call for real estate, and it should be a wake-up call. So a couple things I want to say. If you're dealing with a lot of relocation business, that's probably going to decline, and you need to be looking for the next thing to take that place. That's thing one. Thing two, you got to remember, in the worst of times in 2008, and this was a housing-led crash in 2008. In the worst of times, we still sold 4 million homes. Okay, So it was down 20 something percent. Well, you're sitting there going, okay, am I going to have a 20% decline? No, because you had more than that in real estate agents leave. Remember, Kent was talking about recessions are good for cutting the underbrush. You've got a lot of non-qualified people out there that it's, again, as I'm sure you've all heard, it's easier to get a license to cut hair than it is to sell real estate. So you start culling the herd as far as the real estate professionals, getting those people out, and you can actually increase your market share. The key to that is education, 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 and hand-holding. I will also tell you that you need to be thinking from a real estate perspective, just like when you go to a restaurant, you know, and you order something. Oh, would you like mushrooms on that steak? Oh, would you like dessert with this? Can I get you another bottle of wine? As you've got a buyer in your car right now, you need to be thinking, you know, what are the services could I, you know, potentially provide them? And when you're taking that one person, the guy I do a lot of the transactions with down here in Tampa, by the way, I started selling all my rental properties. I just bought them 2 years ago. And I got so nervous about the market, you know, was it August, September of last year, I started selling everything in earnest. And this guy, Andrew Duncan, handled everything. He was one of the top teams in America. But he not only owns his top producing team, he owns a title company, he owns a mortgage company, and he owns an insurance company. And I have used 3 out of those 4 services on multiple occasions. So and then also think about, you know, what other services, when I move, what's going to happen? Let's say I'm moving from point A to point B. Well, I'm probably going to need, you know, a paint job done. I'm probably going to need some landscaping done. And this is where you kind of need to network with your local people and really, really get down to brass tacks as far as being able to take this one buyer, one seller, and then have multiple revenue lines coming off of it.
Dwayne, let me ask you a question. Dwayne, why did you get out of your rental assets? Did you see a bubble
Yes.
that was fixing to get burst?
Yes, I got really, really, really nervous. You know, there's some properties, Kenton, that I did nothing to, that I bought for 150, and now all of a sudden they're worth 260 in 2 years. Okay, mathematically, that doesn't make sense to me at all. That's thing one. Thing two, you know, I started worrying about, especially when the repo thing, like I was kind of, you know, as things came off of lease, I was selling them and all that, trying to maximize value. But as soon as I saw the repo market start to get crazy, I put the hammer down, and I've got one rental property like right now on the market left. So I was glad I kind of got out when I did.
What's the quality of your buyer?
When you say quality of buyer, that
is it what's the quality of the balance sheet of your buyer today versus last fall when you sold?
I couldn't tell you. I will tell you this. I put a property on the market, and it's the last one that I put on the market about a month ago, and I priced it aggressively. I've had 2 reductions since then, and I can't even get a sniff right now. So I'm not sure if it's the balance sheet of the buyer versus the buyers right now are scared to get out and look.
Yeah. I was in Chicago recently. Oh, go ahead, Randy. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to take a step forward and now discuss what are some of the solutions, right? So we released a stimulus package. Is that what we needed? What does the market and what does the economy need going forward to keep us from, to get us out of this and to prevent this from happening a second time?
Well, that'll be very much virus driven, and the fact that some people, especially in DC, call it a stimulus package is kind of shocking, because it's printing money, it's sprinkling money, trying to put out a forest fire. It's not going to stimulate anything. It's going to try to make people. You can't make people whole, because if you're going to print $2+ trillion as a stimulus package, if you're going to conjure money out of thin air, then why not make it 25 trillion? We've been told, the market has told us, and bright people like Larry Summers have told us that deficits no longer matter. So if we're going to print 2 trillion, why not 4? Why not 6? Because if you need $1,200, you can't sit around and wait 60, 90 days for $1,200.
Right.
The situation on the ground is that bleak. When you have huge swaths of the low-skilled earners now put out of work, they're not caring about stimulus, they're caring about feeding their kids. And then when you have balance sheets that seize up, that crater, and you have massive insolvencies going on, the Fed couldn't print enough money to make up for that. That's where, if we get a handle on this virus, that'll be a good thing, so at least we can catch our breath. How we go from there is going to be tricky. The hardest thing is going to be if September, October, November comes around and this thing swings back like it's doing in China, because we've already done what we can do. We can have another stimulus round. It's going to be tricky. The Justinian virus that brought down the Roman Empire in 541, that lasted 225 years. So it hit, it came back hard, it hit solid the second year, and it lingered for 225 years. We don't know where this virus is going to head. The only thing that's going to give us confidence to move forward is a vaccine. It's up to the scientists, not the central bankers.
And Randy, from an economic standpoint, deleveraging has to happen. It just has to. It has to happen at a corporate, governmental, and consumer standpoint. If you look at the amount of consumer debt out there, it's just ridiculous. You know, after 2008, right around 2010, the nation's savings rate started to really go up. And then the market got good and the savings rate started to decline again. I'm looking at a chart right now. Just pulled it up. In June of 2008, so that's, you know, basically 13 years ago, the Fed had a balance sheet of less than $1 trillion, 0.9.
Right.
And the national debt, the U.S. national debt was 8.3. So that's 9.2 trillion. Today, fast forward 13 years, 9.2 trillion then. In 13 years, it is now 41 trillion. And that is not updated to the last few stimulus rounds. So it's going to be, you know, 45 plus trillion between the Fed's balance sheet and the national debt. I'm sorry, that also includes the stimulus injections. So when we were talking about, it's all been kind of a Fed-induced or debt-ridden market cycle, we have got to get acclimated to more of this versus this. You know, it's going to be slow growth in the lower level markets right now. As far as the first time, and you know, you may see, I'll tell you something interesting. I've seen a few instances of where land in the country with a nice little cabin and a lake had been taken off the market because it didn't sell, and it put back on and got multiple offers. So you kind of wonder from a social distancing perspective, could we have a second home, you know, kind of market? Then I would also wonder, what I told a group of agents the other day is, if I had a real estate company today, I would go find the highest priced apartments, condominiums, or whatever I could. And I would have a picture of the small cramped space. And then I would have a picture of you know, for the same mortgage payment, a really nice house in the backyard sipping lemonade. Where would you rather social distance, right? Because it used to be cool. I can walk to work and there's a benefit to that. But there's also right now, the downside is I'm around a million different people and I'm cramped. So you may you know, move to the burbs where we had to move to the urban areas a minute ago. The last thing I will tell you is this. I believe that we're going to have at least a freeze, if not a decline in real estate prices for the next couple of years, due to demand, due to some, you know, due to demand, and then due to potential foreclosures and things like that that are coming on the market. But that being said, The only reason why interest rates are so low is because we, the United States, keep buying the treasuries to push them down. That just can't happen forever. So I'm of the belief that interest rates will go back, not to historic norms, but to go back up. So you got to ask yourself, are you better off? When you walk into a car lot, the first thing they ask you is, what do you want your payment to be, right? They're payment buyers. You need to be thinking about mortgage people, real estate buyers is payment buyers. Would you rather have a home today at $1,800, or you could potentially get it at a lower price, but a higher interest rate down the road, and it's going to be $2,100. Me, I like 18 versus 21. You got to be thinking from a payment buyer perspective.
I don't know. Dwayne brought up a good point about savings. We became net savers after the GFC in '08. And then we became net spenders and net borrowers. But if you look at interest rates, if you look at what central bankers have done to interest rates, how have they made it enticing for you to save money? How do I save money today? What's the point of me going onto the marketplace and buying a corporate or sovereign debt when it gives me next to nothing? And in a 2% inflation world, I'm going backwards. So I'm either going to buy equities, high risk, or I'm going to spend it. The other downside to low rates is all those pension funds that are built and they're only going to pay out based on a certain hurdle rate are now going backwards. So unfunded liabilities in the last 6 months have just skyrocketed. So if you're a public employee, or if you're planning on retiring in 10 years, the math just went against you exponentially because of asset prices collapsing and interest rates going to near zero.
Perfect. And at this point, I want to take a quick pause because part of my agreement to get Dwayne to spend his afternoon with us was to give him an opportunity to share a mission that's very important to him, something that's probably very important to everyone, whether or not they know it. But I would like for Dwayne just to share a little bit about what you've got going on with the Spring.
Yeah, so I'm on the board of a place called the Spring. It's a home for battered and abused women and children. We get them out of life-saving situations. We house them in very nondescript places. We feed them, we clothe them, we get them set up with attorneys for restraining orders, as well as divorce papers. We help, through our donated clothing bank, because when they escape the abuser, they're escaping with the clothes on their back and what little money they've got in their pocket. And we have literally got to do everything for them to get them out. As you guys know, with the stay-at-home, rise of domestic violence is going off the charts. And at the absolute worst time, we have got not due to our own making, but we got a funding crisis at the Spring. Our CEO is one of the best from a fiduciary responsibility I've ever seen. However, the Spring in Tampa gets their money 60% of their money from a place called FCADV. It's a domestic violence coalition from the state of Florida. It goes up here and then they distribute it all out. Well, the lady that was running this thing up here, Tiffany Carr, is under arrest, fraud, you name it. She was stealing off the top, and all this money that was going down to places like the Spring has been frozen. We got $240,000 a month. The last thing that she did before she kind of went on the lam, so to speak, was to put that money in a trust that only she controls. And she has told the state of Florida she will release that money if they agree to drop all the fraud charges and criminal charges against her. We had one of our big fundraising deals that was supposed to be last Friday that we should have got 100 to 150 grand. We had to cancel that due to COVID-19. We had got 3 different stores that will receive donations and we turn around and sell. We've had to close because of COVID-19. So at the absolute worst time, we were in a funding crisis. I donated, just to let you guys know, I'm very, very involved in the Spring. So this is above and beyond what I've done. But I donated an additional $100,000 to them the other day. And I'm trying to raise the CEO of Slack. Thank God he chimed in with 75 grand. I've had a few others, 50 here, 50 there. Then we've had some $5,000, $50, $25, you name it. I'm going to type this in. It doesn't matter what you can donate. If you've got any value at all from this call, from either, I want to steal money from Kenton here, but if you got any value from Kenton or any value from me at all, or you just feel the need, I know times are tough right now, but I will tell you that the times I've had started 3 really successful business. A staffing company we started in the recession of 1990. House Buyer Network after the dot-com bubble in 2001. And then Commissions Inc. in basically at the tail end of 2010. So for the reason why I'm telling you guys this is you structure your business right, you're not only going to grow and prosper, but you're going to take market share. You can't be scared of this market. You've got to embrace what's going on. You've got to be the ones out there hand holding. And again, multiple revenue and everything else. And I'll be more than happy if agents want to get on. I can give you more ideas, down the road as far as how to attack your market. But if you've received one thing at all, did that go through? Somebody said, I don't see anything. Where to donate? Randy,
Donate to the spring.
Can you make sure?
Donate to the spring.org.
Oh, wait, I sent it to all the panelists.
I got it. There we go.
Randy, is there any way you could share my Facebook link?
Yeah.
The one
Happy
where
to
I'm
do it.
the video?
I will.
It would be greatly appreciated. I can't tell you, this is the last story I'll tell you about that. I've always been, not always, I guess the last 20 years I've been as active as charities as I possibly could, but this one actually broke my heart. 2 Thanksgivings ago, when I first joined the board, I asked the CEO, Mindy, what are you guys doing for Thanksgiving? She says, nothing, we can't afford it. We just have a regular meal. And so me and a few other board members decided to cater a very nice Thanksgiving meal. I figured these ladies had been beaten and abused enough. And so we not only catered it, we served the meal. And I'll never forget, you're seeing ladies with black eyes and bruises all over the face, and it just breaks your heart. And there's this little boy, he's maybe 9 or 10 years old, and he turned around and said to me, he said, Mister, can I have another piece of cake? And I said, absolutely. And as he reaches to hand me the cake, I looked down on his arm, and there was probably 40 to 50 cigarette burns on his arm. And I went home that night, and I will tell you, I shed more than one tear, and I just couldn't handle it. And I want to do everything in my power to stop this. And, a lot of people have said, well, Dwayne, that's in Tampa or whatever else. A life is a life. It doesn't matter if it's in New Orleans, Louisiana, Alaska, or whatever. A life's a life. If you can help me, I'll try to return the favor to your market one day. I promise you that.
So the link there is there in the chat, as well as to Dwayne's Facebook page, where you can scroll on his timeline and find the video. Let's finish real quick on what the what's the good news? What do realtors have to look forward to in this summer and throughout the rest of 2020?
Golly, you still got low interest rates. You can look forward to getting all the. I can't tell you how many times I have heard on the phone, I'm dealing with this rookie real estate agent, and they don't know what they're doing. They're going to wind up screwing up this closing, right? So you're going to have all these people that you can't stand that are a drag to the industry get out of the market, okay? So that's going to allow you to take market share. Embrace what is happening right now. Don't be scared of it. Embrace it. Look, the market's going to suck, okay? You can either go home and suck your thumb and whine about it, or you can make things happen. Me, I like to make things happen, and I'll be more than happy. I'll talk to anybody that'll listen. I'll be more than happy to help you come up with a strategic plan in your market. If Randy wants to do another one of these calls, I'll be more than happy to do it. But there's different ways to attack different markets. Again, me in Tampa, man, there's a lot of awesome high-rise apartment buildings and condos. I want to attack the living bejesus out of that. I will tell you something else. You got a lot of preppers out there. They're looking for farmland. How do you get the prepper community? I mean, you got to think out of the
A
box.
lot of room in Arizona too, Kenton.
Well, I don't know. Scottsdale has gone on an I mean, you can't swing a dead cat in Scottsdale without hitting a brand new, massive apartment complex. So the city planners have decided to densify, probably at the worst moment, because I don't want to be close to a neighbor these days. I'd rather have that prepper-based rural setting than in a large multifam.
This is who I'm talking about right here.
Yeah.
Sell to the prepper. If there's an Arizona guy, y'all need to be knocking Kenton's door down right now.
Very cool. Any parting notes, Kenton, just in terms of what we can expect the economy of the market to do, or?
No, I gave up forecasting, and we used to forecast Fed funds rates back in '91, and since we were wrong most of the time, I stopped forecasting, and I deal with the world as it presents itself, not what I think it should be. I would just, save your money, deleverage, and wait for good news on the upside. So I do think when this U-shaped recovery, when it does bite, there's gonna be a significant upside, because you still have people that need to get to work, get things done. They've put off buying a lot of assets these days because they're scared. So if we've reached peak fear now or through May, and that fear level drops, volatility is going to drop, and we're going to have some sort of confidence that things are going to get better.
And so then it would probably be ill-advised to ask for a prediction of when in the year that might be.
I have no idea. That's, so much of this is going to be COVID driven. We've got an election year, but as I said the other day, it's probably baked in the cake. We're going to have another 4 years of Trump, or as the market calls it, it's already priced in. We know that. So at least that gives us some stability of continuity, whether you like them or not. We're going to have that same team that's going to tackle this virus for the next 4 years.
And as far as predictions go, I agree with Kenton. You've got publicly traded companies out there that are pulling all guidance. They're basically saying, we don't know what's going to happen. And if they don't know what's going to happen to their own companies, that's why it blows me away how people are buying these, stocks with conviction. Unless you're looking at a, 5 to 10 year time frame with the number one player with the best balance sheet, you are in a stock market gamble right now.
Yeah. For example, I advise a drone company that 6 months ago we approached Boeing to become some sort of strategic partner. They were pretty cocksure. They knew what they wanted. They wanted to set the terms. We kind of gave them the stiff arm. We didn't like the structure. Guess who came back to us last week? Boeing. And yet they are not allowed to buy a paperclip at Boeing these days.
Wow.
So when you have Boeing on financial lockdown, at some point when things get better, there's going to be at least some cash swirling around that needs to get deployed.
Awesome. Well, that is 11 o'clock Pacific time, 2 o'clock. That's our time for today. Kenton, Dwayne, I appreciate y'all and taking some time to talk with us. I imagine, Dwayne, you are probably going to get taken up on your offer of a second series to this, so be prepared for that. Y'all have an awesome rest of your afternoon, and call it a wrap.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Ken, Dwayne, thanks so much.
See ya.
Oh,